Hey everyone, welcome to Chapter Book Storytime. I've got Noodles right here all snuggled up and ready to relax and listen to a story. So that's what I want from you guys too. Go ahead and find a relaxing spot, get a blanket or a pillow or a furry friend, and just find a place to relax and listen to the story because today we are starting a new book. Yesterday we finished the Magic Misfits book 1, and I decided that our next book is actually going to be the Magic Misfits, the second story. So this is the next book in the series, and I wanted to continue this series because since we can't be together, it's it's harder because we can't stop and have conversations about what's happening in the book. But what I like about continuing on with the Magic Misfits series is that you're all familiar already with our characters and with the plot and the location, the setting, and so I think that'll help to carry on our chapter book story time even when we can't physically be together. So I don't have the actual book. I have a version that I downloaded onto my Kindle. So this is what it looks like, just so you guys know. It's just a book on my Kindle. All right, instead of doing a recap, I'm gonna let the author do a recap because they actually did one for me. So here we go, let's dive in. Welcome back. Yes, you, the one with the awesome hair and this book in your hands. Who else would I be talking to? You've returned. How nice to see you again. It's been too long. If I know you at all, I'll bet you're seeking an escape from the ordinary and looking for more adventure, more puzzles, more magic. Well, look no further. I have another story to tell you. Have I ever? I hope you remember everything we discussed in the last book. It will make it easier to hop back in. Need a refresher? No problem. Let's begin with our delightful cast. Do you recall the boy with the fast fingers? The orphan Carter Locke was a whiz with card tricks and could make things vanish and reappear too. Though truthfully, he didn't believe in real magic until he hopped a train to the town of Mineral Wells, where wonders appeared around every corner. From the buzzing circus tents of the fairgrounds to the magnificent auditorium way up in the hills at the Grand Oak Resort. His friend, Layla Vernon, was the young and bright-eyed escape artist extraordinaire who wrangled out of handcuffs and straitjackets as easily as if she'd played with them as toys in her cradle. Surely it had nothing to do with her lucky lockpicks given to her by her fathers, whom she lived with above a certain magic shop on Main Street. Let us not forget Theo Steinmeier, the multi-talented violin prodigy who could levitate objects using his violin bow. Yes, magic can be soothing for the soul and for the heart, especially when it comes with magic. Oh, I think I read that wrong. Yes, music can be soothing for the soul and for the heart, especially when it comes with magic. Theo rarely showed his regally thoughtful face around Mineral Wells unless he was dressed in one of his favorite and famous tuxedos. There was also our little Spitfire, Ridley Larson, whose mad scientist red hair made her look just as fierce as she acted. She could transform one object into another and then back again, all before you could say abracadabra. Ridley kept a notebook hidden in a compartment in the arm of her wheelchair, so she could work out puzzles and invent secret codes to share with her friends. If you're especially kind, maybe one day she'll share them with you too. Or maybe she already has. And last but not least were the hilarious Izzy and Ollie, the comedic Golden Twins, who performed at the Grand Oak Resort. Those two were quite the act, both literally and figuratively. If you wanted laughs, those were the twins you needed. In our previous tale, not long ago, or was it forever ago? I can't remember. Carter, Layla, Theo, Ridley, Ollie, and Izzy used their stage magic tricks to stop a rash of petty robberies and ultimately prevented the theft of the world's largest diamond. Working together, these 6 kids bonded while battling the barbaric BB Bazo and thus formed a very special magic club called the Magic Misfits. Is it all coming back now? Brilliant. All right, so that was all of our characters, a recap on all of our characters and what happened in the last book. So let's see what this book has to say to us. Here's chapter 1. Layla Vernon did not always live in Mineral Wells. In fact, her name had not always been Layla Vernon. When she stayed at Mother Margaret's home for children, Layla's last name had been Doe. Doe was not a name that she'd been given by family. Doe was Layla's name because no one knew who her family was. When Mother Margaret first found Layla, a note card in the bassinet stated only her first name and birth date. Layla never let this get the better of her. In fact, she tried harder than the other girls to keep a positive attitude, even when they treated her as if she were as worthless as a wooden nickel. So if you recall from the first book that we read, we learned that Layla, Mr. Dante Vernon and his husband adopted Layla, and she had lived in an orphanage before this. So this is talking about back when she lived in an orphanage, before she was adopted. That was why, one afternoon, when several girls from Mother Margaret's home were dragging Layla Doe down the hallway toward Mother Margaret's office, Layla let out a loud and boisterous laugh. "Ha ha ha!" she shouted as they pinched her arms. "That tickles!" Layla was not actually tickled by what the mean girls were doing to her, but she figured that maybe an adult would hear her loud cries and intervene. She didn't need to be psychic to know what the girls were up to, as they locked her in the darkest closet in the whole orphanage, at least once a week, all because the tallest of the bunch had decided at some point that she didn't like Layla always smiling and being cheery. Oh dear, so when Layla was living in this orphanage with other girls, it seems like there were some of those girls were not nice to her. And while Layla decided to always try to be positive, and to do her best to be happy and stay positive, and these girls, even when these girls are not being kind to her. The tallest girl wished for Layla to be as miserable as she was, and so she and her friends went out of their way to torment Layla every chance they got. Layla fought with every breath to not show them how much they were hurting her, especially on this particular afternoon when a group of real live magicians from the town of Mineral Wells was going to perform for all the children. Layla had been looking forward to the show for weeks. So, sounds like these other girls in the orphanage aren't happy, and they're trying to bring Layla down because Layla tries to stay positive. Is that a good way to deal with feeling sad? To make other people feel sad around you? Definitely not. But is Layla letting it get to her? She's doing her best to stay positive and, to stay happy and to spread her joy. And maybe if she keeps spreading her joy and spreading her happiness and her love, it'll teach the other girls as well. But we also learned something else from that paragraph. We learned that there's a magic show coming to the orphanage from Mineral Wells. Who do you think might be putting on that magic show? It's a magician from Mineral Wells. Come on, guys, Layla said with a forced smile. Let's all go down to the recreation room. Everyone is probably waiting for us. There might even be cookies. The only response she got was a twisted echo of her last statement. There might even be cookies, the tall girl repeated snidely. The other girls cackled cruelly. As the gang dragged Layla toward Mother Margaret's office, she dug her heels into the linoleum. But together, the girls were too strong. The soles of her shoes left black streaks across the gray tile floor. The tallest girl flung the office door open, and the others yanked Layla through the room toward the familiar closet door. They threw her into the closet and slammed the door shut, drowning Layla's vision in darkness. Layla heard the door lock from the other side. Okay, joke's over, let me out, Layla begged, banging on the door. Don't you want to see the magicians? Sure we do, called one of the girls through the thick wood. And that's where we are headed right now. Come join us, if you can, called another. Laughter rang out like the cries of crows that often sounded across the playground outside. Their footsteps faded as they ran away. That was really not nice. These girls are not being nice to Layla. What do you think Layla can do? She's now stuck in this closet. I don't know, let's see. Layla knew what would happen when she tried the knob, but, always hopeful, she tried it anyway. It was locked, and she was alone, again. Layla swiveled her head back and forth, but the dark was so complete her eyes didn't register any movement. Her heart thundered, as it usually did whenever the gang of girls shoved her in there. The acrid smell of the damp wooden walls stung her nose. In the past, it had taken an adult an hour or more to discover Layla cowering in the corner of the closet, and whenever they did find her, they scolded Layla as if she had locked herself in the headmistress's closet. To calm down, Layla imagined herself as a beautiful girl who was part of the magic show downstairs, purposely shut inside a cabinet on stage, then wowing the audience by disappearing without a trace, with a flash and a bang and a whiz-up. Frustration clenched her body. The magic show was the only thing she'd been looking forward to recently. She wanted to see white doves fly from the formal jackets of the magicians, flower bouquets appear from thin air, playing cards float up and out of a deck. Layla decided she was not going to allow those girls to ruin this for her. For the first time, she'd stand up, really stand up to them. But before she could do that, she had to figure out a way to escape. So Layla, she's really strong, right? Like, even when these girls are being terrible to her, they're being so awful, they're trying to make Layla sad and mad like they are. Layla's saying no. I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to stay positive, and I'm going to calm my body and figure this out. Figure out how to get out of this closet. Do you think she can do it? Layla felt around in the dark, pushing her finger against the keyhole. Perhaps there was a way to unlock it from the inside. Layla had never picked a lock before, but she'd read about heroes doing it in stories. First, she'd need some tools. She plucked out the bobby pin holding her hair in place and stuck it in the keyhole. She turned it back and forth. Inside the lock, the tool met the tumblers. She heard them clinking. But without another pin, she wouldn't be able to catch them and turn the locking mechanism. She didn't have another bobby pin, but she was standing inside Mother Margaret's office closet. Sweeping the floor with her fingers, her heart sped up as she encountered a lone paperclip. Luck was on her side. She unfolded the clip. She stuck the tip into the keyhole and felt around, putting tension on the plug, seeing how far it would give. The pins clicked against the tumblers, but kept slipping. Muffled cheer came from the floor below. The show had begun. No, 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 Layla whispered to herself. In her mind's eye, she pictured the mob of magicians standing on stage, pulling rabbits out of hats, transforming marbles into pearls, levitating chairs, and flipping black silk cloaks over their shoulders. She'd been counting on some magical memories to get her through the next few months with a smile on her face. The more she rushed, the harder it was to manipulate the pin and clip in the keyhole. Minutes ticked by until it felt as though she might never escape. She worried the show would end before she broke out. Layla was about to throw down her tools in frustration when she felt a distinct clink, and the door swung open a crack. She tapped her feet excitedly against the floor in a celebratory dance. She did it. So she used a clip from her hair and a paper clip that she found on the floor and was able to pick the lock and unlock it with those and get out. At the top of the stairwell, a voice sounded from below. And now for our final act. The sound of clapping grew louder as Layla raced halfway down, then paused. In the rec room, several rows of chairs were arranged around a platform upon which sat a distinctive man in a black suit and a tall top hat. A black cape fell from his shoulders, and when he moved his arms, a red silk lining winked at her. The man's hair was pure white and made of curls, while a straight black mustache smirked from the top of his lips. Layla plopped herself onto a middle step and watched the man with the curly white hair through the rickety wooden balusters. You must already know who the man with the curly white hair is, but Layla didn't. Do you know who it is? Who's the magician with the curly white hair? From the town of Mineral Wells? This was the moment she saw Mr. Vernon for the very first time, and the sight took her breath away. Who is it? Mr. Vernon, Mr. Dante Vernon. The man that will be the one to adopt her, right? But that hasn't happened yet. Do you remember when Carter first encountered Mr. Vernon? It was on the night that Carter arrived in Mineral Wells. He came down from the train yard to blend in with the crowds at Bozzo's circus. Mr. Vernon's deft skills, flipping 2 coins around and around between his knuckles, blew Carter's mind. Now, as Layla watched this same man's 2 assistants tie him tightly to a metal chair, she felt something even more profound than Carter had. She was certain that she'd escaped from the closet upstairs so that fate would allow her to see this man. The stage assistants' faces were covered with a thin, black, stretchy fabric. First, they cuffed the man's ankles to the chair's legs. Then, they wrapped a long chain around his torso and the chair's back so that his arms were pinned to his sides. The orphans in the audience gasped as the assistants attached a thick padlock to the ends of the chain, which hung in the center of his chest. When they slipped an oilcloth sack over the man's head, several of the children cried out in fear. Mother Margaret stood and waved her arms. "Mr. Vernon is a professional," she said. "Do not be alarmed." The man's voice came from under the hood. "Do be alarmed," he corrected. "For if I haven't freed myself by the end of this very minute, I shall run out of oxygen." Mother Margaret looked sheepish as she sat back down, as if thinking she'd made a mistake inviting this man to possibly perish in front of her wards. Layla clung to the balusters, peering through like they were the bars of a cage. The 2 assistants held up a large white sheet before draping it over Mr. Vernon's body. The sheet covered him from head to toe. One of the assistants brought out a large hourglass timer, then set it down on the floor so that everyone could watch as the sand slipped through, second by second by second. Layla held her breath. The figure under the sheet wriggled and writhed. The clanging of the clasped chains rang through the room. She couldn't help but think of herself trapped in the closet upstairs minutes earlier. As the final grains poured into the bottom of the hourglass, the children chanted, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The figure under the sheet grew still. Seconds passed. The audience stood, a few at a time, jaws agape, wondered if this was all part of the trick. Layla cried out, "Take off the hood! Someone help him!" Frantic, the 2 assistants raced back onto the stage. They raised the sheet, held it up before the seated man, and peered cautiously behind it. Turning to the audience, they shook their masked heads as if to say, "We're too late." The orphans went wild, some screaming as the assistants dropped the sheet to the floor. The chair where Mr. Vernon had been seated was empty. He disappeared. The room erupted in gasps of surprise until one of the assistants turned to the audience and removed his mask. As soon as the pure white curls sprang out from beneath, Layla knew that they'd all been had. The magician did escape, and in the most unexpected way. The crowd cheered as if someone had just announced that all of them were being adopted that day. The man with the curly white hair stepped to the edge of the stage, grinned, then took a long bow. Layla was so floored, she nearly slid down the stairs. Instead, she stood and clapped harder and longer than anyone else. When the applause ended, Layla pushed her way through the crowd, elbowing the tall girl and her gruff goons aside to approach the man. "How did you do that, Mr. Vernon?" His eyes lit up when he saw her face. He paused as if lost in a trance, then answered quietly, "I'll bet you know exactly why I cannot tell you." Layla thought hard. A magician never reveals his secrets? The man chortled. He tapped her forehead lightly. "A bit of a psychic, are you?" "Not that I know of," said Layla, rubbing at the spot where he'd touched her. She felt the other orphans pushing in from behind her. She fought to block them out of her mind. "Were you really in danger?" "Oh, but I am always in danger," he said with a wink. Layla laughed. "I want to learn how to escape like you did." "I see," he squinted. "Well, it takes years of practice. Is that something you'd be prepared to do?" "Oh, yes. I practice every minute of every day to be like you." "Well, enthusiasm is rarely a bad thing," he said, considering. "What is your name, dear?" "Layla," she answered quietly. "Layla," he echoed. "How pretty. And how long have you lived here with Mother Margaret?" "All my life." He was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to come see you again, Layla. Would that be all right?" Layla's face flushed. "It'd be more than all right," she exclaimed. "Maybe you can teach me a trick or two?" "Maybe." He grinned again, the corners of his eyes crinkling with amusement. With both hands, he pinched his fingers together. As he moved his hands apart, Layla noticed that he held a soft white rope between them. He dropped one end and lowered the rope slowly into her outstretched palm. "For you. See what you can do with this. Might I suggest learning different types of knots? They can be helpful in many situations." Layla's face flushed a deeper pink. She wanted to throw her arms around his neck and say thank you, but she didn't want to make him think she was a weirdo. At that moment, the other orphans crowded forward, asking for Mr. Vernon's autograph and edging Layla away. She didn't mind. He was going to come back and see her again. He'd teach her a trick, maybe. She'd be ready. She'd have some new knots to show him in response. Later, in the bedroom she shared with 5 other orphans, Layla pulled a tin box out from a hiding place behind a brick in the wall beside her bed. She opened the lid, revealing a few loose, glittering keys. One key was very special to her. You see, when someone placed Layla on the doorstep of Mother Margaret's home as an infant, they'd wrapped her in a blanket and left a string looped around her neck, with a key tied to it like a pendant. Of course, Layla didn't remember any of that. She knew the story only because Mother Margaret had shared it with her. It was this first key that made Layla start looking for spare ones, or ones that appeared to be lost. She hoped that someday she'd have an interesting collection of all shapes and sizes. Staring down at her keys, Layla thought about the magic show and how Mr. Vernon had managed to break out of those impossible chains. For the first time, she felt like she'd unlocked something inside herself. A wish to escape. Really escape. When the man with the white curly hair returned later that week with his husband, offering to adopt her, her wish came true. Like magic. And that's the end of the first chapter. So this chapter took us back in time. It took us back in time to before we met Carter and before they had that adventure at the Grand Oak Resort battling BB Bazo. This is going way back in time to when Layla lived at the orphanage before she was adopted by Mr. Dante Vernon. And we learned a little bit about who Layla is and why she is the way she is, right? She faced a lot of hardships at the orphanage. There were other girls there that were, sad and angry themselves, and in response they were trying to make her sad and angry, and they were not kind to her. They were locking her in closets, but Layla stayed strong. She did her best to stay positive. Even when these girls were being so mean to her, she decided she was going to be positive, and she was going to stay strong and stay true to herself and continue to share her kindness and her love, even if they weren't willing to. And we also learned why she wanted to become an escape artist, right? She had this experience breaking out of this closet. She got to see this awesome magic show where she saw this magician escape from these chains. She was inspired. It made her excited and inspired. And we also learned about her special key. When she was left at the orphanage as a baby, whoever had left her there had left a key. We don't know anything about the key, but it's special to her. So that's probably something to keep in mind for this story. But we learned how Layla met Mr. Dante Vernon and his husband, and how she got adopted. So that's really cool. And then, and it looks like tomorrow's chapter 2, will be jumping forward in time again, back to when we left off before. Yeah, it says the next chapter starts with years later. So next chapter we'll jump forward in time again, back to where the last book was happening. So that was really cool to learn about Layla's history and learn about where she comes from, and why she is the way she is. She's really a strong, positive person, and I'm inspired by that. I hope you are too. All right, my friends, I'll see you next time. Bye. Say bye, Noodles. Bye.